Tuesday, June 4th, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Unofficer Herman Butcher gripped the ship's railing as he descended the gangplank, his legs unsteady after 14 days crossing the Atlantic. Through the morning haze, he witnessed something that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda. American dock workers, both white and black, operated side by side with machinery that seemed to belong to a future century. Women in coveralls operated cranes. Children sold newspapers at the gates. No one fled at the sight of enemy uniforms. Die Spinnen die Amerikaner. He later documented this moment in his memoir, Behind Barbed Wire. The Norfolk base sprawled across 4,300 acres, its cranes loading and unloading dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single morning, this one port handled tonnage that exceeded Hamburg's weekly capacity. But it wasn't the scale that stunned the arriving prisoners, it was the normality. Civilians wandered freely near military installations. Vendors sold coffee and donuts within sight of warships. 2,500 veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps stood in formation on American soil, the first major contingent of what would become 425,000 German prisoners held in the United States by war's end. The processing at Norfolk began with what Butcher would later describe as the first impossibility. German military doctrine dictated that prisoners were either assets to exploit or burdens to minimize. Yet here, American officers were reading Geneva Convention rules in fluent German, explaining rights and asking about dietary needs. According to International Red Cross records, Jewish American personnel distributed Red Cross packages while explaining that kosher meals were available for any Jewish prisoners. The medical inspections defied military logic. German prisoners with wounds received the same penicillin, that miracle drug barely available to German field hospitals, as American soldiers. Swiss Red Cross inspector Guy Matro noted in his July 1943 report, medical treatment provided to German POWs equals or exceeds that given to American military personnel. The most incomprehensible sight came during their first meal. German prisoners were led to a mess hall where American sailors were eating. The two groups, separated only by 50 feet, ate in the same facility, sharing the same food lines and the same quality meals. The Americans showed no particular interest, more focused on a radio broadcast of a baseball game than on their enemies. The 3-day train journey to camps in the interior provided the next level of cognitive dissonance. Unlike the secretive movements in Germany, American authorities made no attempt to hide the POWs. The trains, not boxcars, but actual passenger coaches with cushioned seats, stopped at regular stations where civilians gathered to observe. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., German prisoners watched American families seeing off soldiers. The same platform hosted enemies and families separated only by windows and guards. The trains passed through industrial areas that should have been camouflaged. Instead, factories displayed their names in huge letters. At the Glenn L. Martin aircraft plant, parking lots were visible from the train, filled with workers' personal automobiles. Through Pennsylvania, the night sky glowed orange from blast furnaces that never stopped. At a stop in Harrisburg, German officers watched American workers at shift change. Men carrying lunchboxes, wearing wristwatches, and driving personal vehicles. One worker casually threw away a half-eaten apple and opened a fresh one. The casual waste of food by a laborer stunned officers who had seen their men fight over scraps in Africa. Camp Hearn, Texas, opened in December 1942 and housed up to 4,800 German prisoners in conditions that exceeded what most had known as civilians. The infrastructure itself challenged German understanding of prisoner treatment. Wooden barracks with electric lights, indoor plumbing with flush toilets and hot water heaters. Individual beds with mattresses and sheets, not straw pallets. The Swiss inspector noted that conditions at Camp Hearn surpassed living conditions many of these men knew in Germany. The camp commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cecile Stiles, explained something unprecedented. Prisoners would largely govern themselves, electing spokesmen and organizing activities. Self-governance for enemies seemed like either weakness or a trap, but nothing prepared them for the camp canteen, a store where prisoners could purchase goods with script earned from voluntary labor: cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing materials, and musical instruments. The idea that enemy prisoners could shop, could choose purchases beyond mere survival, scrambled military thinking. By September 1943, severe labor shortages led to POW employment throughout Texas. Prisoners earned 80 cents per day. At the vast King Ranch, covering 825,000 acres, larger than the state of Rhode Island, German POWs encountered American agriculture on a scale that defied European comprehension. They worked alongside Mexican-American and black laborers, a racial mixing that contradicted Nazi theories. They were stunned by the mechanization. A single combine harvester replaced dozens of workers. On cotton gins, processing speeds were impossible by European standards, yet workers took regular breaks, listened to radios, and ate full lunches. Productivity, through good treatment rather than harsh discipline, contradicted Wehrmacht experience. Most importantly, they witnessed American farmers criticizing Roosevelt freely, complaining about government policies without fear. Such defiance of authority would mean death in Nazi Germany. This demonstration of democracy's strength through discord fundamentally challenged authoritarian assumptions. By early 1944, a sophisticated educational program was established at Camp Hearn. The camp library, growing to over 5,000 volumes, included works by German authors banned by the Nazis, such as Thomas Mann and Erich Maria Remarque. A German prisoner could read books that would have meant death to possess in Nazi Germany. Anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through careful screening, became barracks leaders and newspaper editors, their influence on non-political prisoners carefully cultivated. The most intense psychological shock was delivered not in classrooms but in factories. At the Alcoa aluminum plant, POWs observed workers discarding more aluminum scrap in a day than German aircraft factories could acquire in a week. At food processing plants, perfectly edible produce was destroyed for minor cosmetic flaws, while German civilians faced starvation. A letter from one corporal stated, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit. Fruit that would be treasure in Germany is garbage here." Christmas 1943 at Camp Hearn is extensively documented. The entire town of Hearn mobilized to ensure enemy prisoners had a proper celebration. Local churches collected 4,800 individual gift packages. The American Legion donated cigarettes and sports equipment to their current enemies. The camp Christmas tree, 30 feet tall, was decorated with electric lights that burned continuously, an electrical display unthinkable even in peacetime Germany. Local churches performed Christmas concerts in German for the prisoners. Mrs. Sarah Patterson, the choir director whose son was serving in Italy, led the performance. The cognitive dissonance of American mothers singing to enemy soldiers while their sons fought Germans broke several prisoners emotionally. The Christmas feast menu included roast turkey, 1 pound per man, ham, pie, and ice cream, totaling approximately 5,000 calories per person. Meanwhile, German civilian rations, when available, provided 1,200 calories daily. Working in Texas exposed the prisoners to the paradox of American segregation. They found themselves taking orders from black American guards, a scenario legally forbidden in Nazi Germany. Yet, these prisoners could eat in local restaurants that refused service to the very black soldiers guarding them. This paradox, being treated better than some Americans while being enemies, scrambled ideological certainty. The transformation was profound. Herman Butcher immigrated to the U.S. in 1953 and became an engineer for General Motors. George Gartner, who famously surrendered in 1985, had lived illegally in America for 40 years, choosing the U.S. over his homeland. Post-war surveys showed 74% of returned POWs held favorable views of American democracy. They returned home with knowledge of free markets and democratic governance. America's greatest victory wasn't on battlefields, but in prison camps, where enemies became advocates through the simple act of witnessing a society wealthy enough to afford mercy.